Josina Anderson and Pete Prisco here from our set in Los Angeles. Josina, I think the biggest goal each time for Roger Goodell when he comes out to one of these is to really not make any news. What was the most important thing that you heard from him today?
The most important theme from this press conference was surrounding the diversity and inclusion issues surrounding the NFL right now, and that are particularly highlighted by Brian Flores' lawsuit, and wanting to hear what his reaction was about that, particularly how it ended up with the total tally of people of color in the NFL. And then also, just even more so than that, is also what they plan on doing about it, right? This is about outcomes and not necessarily just cliche statements in a press conference, which is what you typically get from this. I find that the reporter questions are often more detailed than the answers. But yeah, that was definitely the most important point if you're asking me from a macro standpoint. Yeah.
Look, everybody knows that there's been a lack of diversity hires in this league for a long time. What we also have to realize is Roger Goodell doesn't control that. He works for the NFL owners. That's on them. Mm-hmm. If they're going to change that, it has to be a collective group of owners who do that and decide that that needs to change. And Roger Goodell, I think he'd be the first one to tell you that it's not right. It needs to be fixed. But again, that's not on him. He doesn't own an NFL team. He works for the NFL owners.
Josina, he was asked about calling Brian Flores' legal claims baseless, without merit, and then kind of walking that back just a little bit, saying he's talking about the legal aspect of that and not Brian Flores as a person. What did you think of the way he kind of walked that back just a little bit to put maybe just a little bit more spin on that?
Well, first of all, that answer was definitely canned and prepared. A lot of people in the media made something about that statement, as we all collectively should have, because it was just so contradictory, right? As far as what I think about it, I don't think that they are in separate buckets. Yes, you can have the legal components, but his experiences are part of the things that he is alleging in this lawsuit. So while it may be by definition separate, there's certainly some interweaving, obviously, with how he feels, what he says that he went through, and ultimately some of the specific claims that are, quite frankly, very troubling. And obviously the league would want to, get underneath that. And I'm glad that they changed their tone. Matter of fact, I think that it highlights the fact that not only do you need diversity in the league and on the field, but in communications and in the media, so somebody can get in somebody's ear and say, hello, that doesn't sound, like you guys are taking this seriously, and we need to re-message, what we're saying from Park Avenue, at least when it comes to reviewing it.
I thought that statement was so quick to get out by the NFL. That's what the problem was. They put that out the same day. How do they know that without really studying the facts of the case before you dive in? And I think that's where the NFL hurt themselves, and that's why he's walking it back. They realize by saying that the same day that the case is filed,
it helps his case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that hurt the NFL.
A lot of talk lately about the Rooney Rule. I mean, you could go back probably decades, and there's been talk about the Rooney Rule. It's been tweaked a little bit. Roger Goodell said today that they are going to look at it once again, and he even suggested maybe that they get rid of it. What do you think?
Well, obviously, you're right. There's been a lot of talk about the Fritz-Pollard Alliance getting together and constructing the Rooney Rule. And in that vein, there's also been a lot of criticism of it. But I think in that conversation should always include, if the rule is not there, then what is the alternative? Just like when you're talking about a quarterback, you don't like this quarterback, but tell me who you're replacing that quarterback with. Because Rooney Rule, right? There also may be less transparency. Maybe there is less diversity. So I think it's not just about talking about what's problematic about it, but what you want to do in place of it. So this comes in the light of Reverend Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson by virtual conference talking with the commissioner about their desires to have it removed. And I even said on Twitter, Pete, I wondered out loud, and this is even towards the reverends, Did they speak to anybody from the Fritz Pollard Alliance, whether it be Executive Director Rod Graves, Cyrus Mary, who's not a part of it now, but was a lawyer responsible for the architecture of the rule, or all the people who were involved in it, to just get the education behind what they're doing? Because while it might be flawed, it's still well-intentioned, and it has created conversation, necessary conversation.
The fact that the Rooney Rule is in place tells you there's a major problem in this league. It shouldn't have to be that way. You should be able to find good candidates no matter what the skin color is. And it shouldn't be this way. And the fact that that rule is there tells you there's a major problem. And so what's the answer? How do you fix it? That's the million-dollar question. How do you fix it? I mean, there are a lot of, and you know, there are a ton of great minority candidates out there that never get to the coordinator level. And if you don't get to the coordinator level, you're not going to get to the head coaching level. And so it's not just about interviewing them for certain jobs. Quarterback coaches, then they become a coordinator. Then you go up the tree, and then you become a head coach. And that's where the problems are. So, yeah, the Rooney Rule, has it worked to some degree? Sure, it's opened some eyes. But the fact that it's in place tells you that there's still a problem.
And, you know, there's another core issue with this, right? When it comes to ownership. And how much can you make someone who owns something make a personnel decision that they want to or that they don't want to? That is something that is just core to any business, right? And certainly, even just using the example of Mike Tomlin, who is a product of the Rooney Rule, to highlight what can be positive about it is good. But ultimately, we keep getting to this same threshold. Look at this past hiring cycle. There were 9 vacancies, and we have one extra, or at least should I say even extra. We had the hiring of one black candidate in Lovie Smith, who was just newly added at the end of the conversation, and also a biracial candidate in Mike McDaniel, who gets added to that total. And there were certainly, as you mentioned, a lot of qualified candidates, but can you impress upon an owner to do that if they don't want to do that? So, I mean, this is like a cyclical conversation, right?
The thing about it is it's comfort. And until they open up the lines of communication and the ability to communicate and get to know coaches in this league and have it trickle down, that's where the problem is. And I think that part of the problem is on the owners. That part of the problem is on the general managers who are making these decisions along with the owners. You have to be able to understand everybody, not just people you know, not just your buddies, not just your pals, not just people you've worked with in the past. Open your mind up. You know, experience, find out what's out there, because I think they're too close-minded when they make these hires.
And not only that, but it might be beneficial for you business-wise. So even if you're just about your money, you know, widening the talent pool in terms of diversity, and that also includes, you know, gender and what have you, might be beneficial to your pockets.
Well, and there was a lot of talk about owners in this thing, and one of the most interesting things to come out was Roger Goodell saying, yes, the other owners could potentially vote an owner out.
Well, and I think that comes up in light of the specific allegation in Brian Flores' lawsuit that has to do with Stephen Ross and whether or not there was any payment to lose games. I mean, that would then start to touch the Sports Bribery Act, which is a whole nother, you know, Pandora's box, if they're even able to find any smoking gun with regards to that allegation, particularly in light of what's going on with gambling around the league and the new acceptance of that. I mean, you know, you've been covering the league a long time. There's a whole new different tone around gambling from when you started, right?
I can remember having a conversation with Roger Goodell once upon a time about opening it up to the gambling.
Yeah.
And look what's happened. You're right. But integrity of the game is first and foremost when it comes to that type of thing. But we're not just talking about Stephen Ross either. We're talking about Dan Snyder as well. And the fact that you could vote out a fellow owner, they could vote him out as well. So it's interesting that that's even out there as a possibility.
Or even, what would you do that with an owner who obviously is among the top earning owners in the league? You know, say what you want to say about the Washington Commanders now, newly named, but they've been up there in terms of league revenue. So, you know, there's always a financial component in consideration to that. But really quick, Chris, I wanted to just say, you know, when it comes to the conversation around Brian Flores, is just this notion, I think is just very important, that someone should have to sacrifice their job to bring up a concern or ring the bell. And the more and more that we talk about that, how that embeds that expectation into all of our, collective conscious, and how, serious that is. Because if we all have like a sense of fear of highlighting issues, then this is just all for naught.
Yeah. And we've heard some say they don't think he will ever get a job again, a head coaching job anyway. Pete feels differently. You think he will eventually become a head coach?
In terms of his lawsuit, I say yeah, but I go back to something I said the other day, and we talked about it. I think the trust factor with an owner who hires him is all but shot. Not because of the lawsuit, but because of the fact that he's putting this out there that his owner said this to him, in terms of what he would do tanking for the season. I don't think that's going to allow him to coach again now that I think about it.
Well, let's talk about that tanking allegation. Roger Goodell said he was seriously disturbed by that. He said, quote, "We'll deal with it very seriously." A lot of people on social media, because I was following the reaction, are saying, "Oh, yeah, right. That's really, yeah, you're really going to deal with that." Do you think there will be much punishment if they do find out that there might have been pay for loss?
Well, I think that goes hand in hand with transparency and how much they share about what they've learned, which is the exact opposite of what happened with the investigation with the Washington Commanders, and how they keep underlining that was oral to protect the desires of privacy from the alleged victims, when those women are saying, not only did we just ask for our names not to be included, but we didn't ask for our statements not to be shared. You can still not have our names included, but we still want people to know, the substance of what we're saying. So that desire for transparency carries over into what you were just saying about looking into potential tanking, and payment associated with that. I mean, talk about everything that the conduct policy is about. All of that is about integrity of the game, protecting the shield, and all of that is at the discretion of the commissioner. Well, all of that goes out the window if this is just happening so laissez-faire, on some marina in Florida, to potentially have some, covert discussion about how to have this happen.
Look, there have been sports over the years that have been ruined by scandal like this. And they were betting scandals. I mean, college basketball nearly never made it back from some of their betting scandals, fixing games. Boxing back in the day had some of that. This is the one thing that the NFL cannot have. They, especially with the gambling arena opening up to what it is now. If fans and people out there think that there's any chance that the game isn't legitimate, that destroys the game. And that's why this is going to be something they will act on swiftly if indeed there is proof of it.
Because there's also a legal component to that.
Right. He could be facing criminal charges.
Oh, there's a complete legal component to that as well, especially now that they're trying to welcome in this whole ushering of embracing gambling and bet this and bet that and sponsor this and sponsor that, and they're reaping a lot of benefit off of that too. So that it's bad timing.
No question about it. There's always some hot button issue that Roger Goodell has to reference, talk about during his address, his State of the League address, Super Bowl week. This year maybe a little bit more so than others. Pete Prisco, Josina Anderson, Chris Hassel with you as we continue our coverage from Los Angeles, site of Super Bowl 56, presented by Capital One. Inside the NFL, new episodes Tuesday nights at 9:30 Eastern Time. If you miss it live on Paramount Plus, you can always get it on demand, exclusively on Paramount Plus. And coming up next, right here on CBS Sports HQ, it's the Pick Six Fellers, your daily NFL fix with Will Brinson and the guys live from Los Angeles.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.